Interested in real estate? How about wealth? Well, they go hand in hand. And here, you'll learn all about it. Welcome to Be the Bank, a podcast where we discuss and debate the topics centered around real estate investing. Your host, Justin Bogard, shares insights into investing in real estate to create real wealth and passive income for you and your family. He'll share stories of real estate investments done right, walk you through the process of owning a real estate note, and most importantly, educate you so you can be the bank. This is Be the Bank, brought to you by American Note Buyers. Now, here's your host, Justin Bogard.
Hey, Internet. This is episode number 19 on season 5 of the Be the Bank podcast, brought to you by American Note Buyers. I am Justin Bogard. Today, we're going to be discussing kind of activity versus passivity in the real estate note sector, and we'll have Mr. Richard Thornton on to help us through that conversation today. So stay tuned. That logo never gets old, does it, Richard?
No, I like it. When our graphic artist came up with that, was out of the 5 he or she gave us, that was the definite winner.
That's pretty cool. If you guys would like to see what we're talking about, every time we record our podcast, we also record the video stream of it as well on our YouTube channel. So if you go to the American Note Buyers YouTube channel, you can check that out on episode number 19 of season 5. And so it's just a little animation, like Richard said, and it kind of makes some transition and it turns into our logo at the last minute. So it looks pretty cool.
They call it the architectural view. So they draw it out like it's the architectural drawing, and then poof, all of a sudden you've got reality.
Didn't you take some architectural classes?
I did. I was actually trained as a landscape architect for a little bit before I switched to urban planning and finance and other things. But I did.
It's pretty cool. So is it finally warming up or cooling down in the Bay Area?
Well, it is, but it isn't. Yes. And the reason I say that's because the mornings have been quite chilly, and it's getting up in the mid 80s in the afternoon now. So it's really quite nice. But we had probably one of the coldest summers we've had in a long time. But that has not been your case, right? You had a nice warm summer?
No, it seems like the Midwest out here and the southern states like Texas, they definitely got a lot of extreme heat. We pegged 100 a couple of times this summer, which isn't unusual, but it's not typically normal to go up over 100 a couple of times. But yeah, we had a consistent week or two. I want to say that was 90 to 95, which is pretty favorably warm. We usually hit that a few times and it jumps back down to high 80s. But this week isn't bad. Yesterday I got up to 80, and I think it's going to be 70 and overcast most of the week now. So it'll be getting closer to what we feel like fall. So everyone's kind of getting excited now. Hopefully the leaves will change in a month or so.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, weather in general this year has been kind of crazy worldwide. I don't know if we can attribute it to global warming or whatever, but between the fires in Canada and Greece and the floods in Libya that they're having right now and all that, there's a lot of people who are really not doing very well because of all that.
Yeah, it's too bad. I don't like to see that happening. There was wasn't a big fire in Hawaii?
Yes, Maui. That's right. That's another thing. I'd forgotten all about that. That's huge.
Closer to home.
A closer to home, and a good friend of mine who runs a property management company was just about ready to buy a company that manages over 150 homes in Maui. Oh. And he was supposed to sign all the documents the day after the fire, and every house that he was going to manage burnt down.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That is crazy timing right there, huh?
It is.
Right on. Well, today we are going to be discussing a topic that you and I have always had offline conversations about, but we thought it would be interesting to bring kind of on air today. And that is kind of what reality is when you are a fully active note investor. And so, Richard, I just want to probably start us down a conversation here and start by saying that when I got into this real estate note investing business, I obviously didn't have a large bankroll. I didn't have much money. I had, some retirement savings and a little bit of cash. So I couldn't go out and buy a lot of loans. I could just buy a couple of small ones. And so then I kind of run out of money quickly. And my option really is the only way I can make more money is to somehow be some sort of facilitator to where I can find deals and I can find people who need deals and kind of merge the two together and add some sort of value in between to make it easier for that buyer and that seller to make kind of a fee income. On the other hand, if somebody has a lot of money they want to invest in and they want to learn this craft, it's becomes a little bit of an easier segue to get into it and become a fully active note investor. So, but there are some other challenges to it. So what's your initial thought?
Well, I think when we initially talked about this, I think you and I both looked at notes coming from different backgrounds and different levels of expertise, and said, the best way to make this work is to jump into it whole hog. So let's quit our day job and jump in with both feet. I mean, there may be in a couple of months or 6 months or something like that, but basically the intent was to get in whole hog. Which meant that you're going to be buying and investing, and you had to get to know people, and you had to, if you wanted to, the traditional line people talk about is where you get in, you broker notes, and you make money brokering notes, and then you move forward from there. You got more money in your pocket, you can move forward, and that's a good thing, and that's a regular way to do it. But the reality, I think, is that you have to look at the yields that you're getting. And once you get into a business full time, you've got a lot of expenses that you ordinarily wouldn't have. You're going through that right now and sort of looking at some of what we have. What are some of the things that you see are nickel and diming us in our business?
Well, there's just a lot of things that I think all of us, just as consumers and as business leaders for our companies, we tend to end up getting too many subscription models that we don't really need. And maybe at the time it made sense, and it sounded like, oh, that cost can be absorbed because we make enough money, or maybe we don't make enough money. And then when you start getting granular with the monthly cash flows that are coming in and the expenses that are going out and the liabilities you have to pay, you start to see some things get out of line. And so it's pretty easy to get out of bounds, I'll say, with subscriptions. I'm talking about subscriptions to things that you need, like maybe some sort of reporting or some sort of CRM you have, or, a subscription for access to certain things that we may need to use. And sometimes they're just kind of nice to have, but you can live without them. And so that's when we have to decide, can we really sustain that? And so when you run a business as a note business, you really have to make sure that you understand your expenses, because this is a cash flow business, right? We are not traditionally flipping loans as a full business model. We are kind of holding the notes for the cash flow. So then our yield, as you mentioned before, needs to be a little bit higher than if I was just investing in my retirement account and it was just my money and there was really essentially no expenses or no overhead with it, because it's just my retirement account. When you're running a business, obviously you have many other expenses, just like running any business in general, like a restaurant or a brick and mortar store, just stuff like that. So I think it becomes really challenging, Richard, to be honest with you. It's not, I think very few people make the opportunity to have their note business be a really thriving business. A lot of times, like any other entrepreneur endeavor that someone would go down, it becomes a numbers game. Like there's a low chance of success because of all the hurdles you have to go around and go through. And it's really a three-headed monster, Richard. Like with you managing marketing, that's a whole beast in itself, and including in that is also social media, which is a whole nother avenue of challenges to try to get your content across versus other competitors, so to speak, that are in the same market. Because our market is the United States, which is every note investor's market is the United States, right?
Right.
Nobody is advertising specifically for like a city because it's just so hard to get inventory for a specific region.
Right.
So that's why we're more broad focused of marketing.
Right. So let's give everybody a little bit of context here, because without getting specifics, you could walk away with a very different attitude. So what we're talking about is, you're right, a CRM. Maybe you have Zoho. Maybe you have, the watered down Salesforce, or whatever CRM, and you cost $200 a month for that. And you've got DocuSign, and that costs $50 a month. And you've got, whatever else, those little things that you have to have, and all of a sudden you turn around and you're spending $2,000 a month on this kind of stuff. And if you are like me, so I had, going into the pandemic, I had a bunch of notes, and I sold a whole lot of my inventory off because people I thought I was going to get hammered in the pandemic. You and I have talked about this, and it turns out it was one of the best sales transaction times that I could ever had.
Yeah.
In the first year, I sold 2/3 of my portfolio. So right now, I've only got about 35 notes left. And I am very much concerned with, and even though we're running A and B, I'm not doing advertising for my old company or anything like that. I've just got an accountant that's keeping me, my average 15% yield that I was getting is coming in around 10%. And I'm going, well, gosh, that's not really what I got into this for. Whereas that's my day to day. That's income. If I had another job, a day job, something like that, didn't have all the advertising, didn't have a CRM, didn't have a whatever, and I was just doing this on an Excel spreadsheet, my results would be a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, once you get into this business, you really have to make a dent pretty quickly, I think, to sustain it, because some people, I would say most people now, don't get into this full time right away. I think they have to build towards it. So they maybe have a really good full time job. Maybe they're an attorney or a dentist, or maybe they're some sort of have a legal profession to where they have, some disposable income that they can invest in. And then they're just trying to build that up and understand how it works. And I think that's a really good model to get into, to build your way towards it. But just to jump in whole hog, as you said earlier, that is more difficult. And there's a low probability, getting out and making the money, because there's so many unique hurdles to go through, that even though you and I have both been through that part of the business and started our own businesses before we combined this one, it's not for everybody, I guess I would say. And it's very difficult, because I couldn't write a book and tell you exactly the blueprint that I did it may not work for you. And you could write a book and have your blueprint on how you did it, and it may not work for somebody else either. There's no like magic way that this works. If you have a franchise, right? If you're part of a franchise and franchisee, then you have a blueprint that is proven and it does work, and it works in any market, because they had it figured out and they've done it in so many different places. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can think of several people that I bought and sold notes with, and they're doing notes on the side, and it's actually, what's a good term? It actually helps out their practice. So they're a real estate broker, or they're a property manager, or they're
Right.
dealing in something that's real estate oriented already.
It's a compliment.
It's compliments. That's
Yep.
that's a good way to do it. Thank you. So it's complimentary. It's they don't have to advertise. They're maybe doing it through their self-directed IRA, things like that. That sort of takes care of the accounting portion of it right there.
Mhm.
So they're not having to have an extra accountant and do all sort of tax reporting. That's a great way to do it. And that's a good way to build up, I think, a sizable portfolio and not have the headaches that you do running a regular day-to-day business.
Yeah. The day-to-day is it's not passive what we do. We're fully active note investors making passive income, but we are not passive in the business, if I can say that. So we're kind of actively passive.
Yeah. And until you get up to until you get up to like, probably 100 notes or something like that in your portfolio. If in your terms of just buying them and holding them and uh, uh, taking the yield off of that at today's yields, when 10 years ago, when you could buy a performing note at 18 to 25% yield, it was a whole lot easier to make the numbers work. But at today's yields, where we're buying things with a lot less return, you have to have a lot more notes in your portfolio, and therefore a lot more of your own capital in it before you're going to make things work.
Yeah, the volume helps. It definitely helps with the cash flow, and it can absorb a little bit of a loss too.
Yeah. So in my instance, I sold a whole lot of partials up front, and that was great because I got to, I had a quick turn model. My goal, although I seldom made it, was to sell, to turn my money over 3 times in a year with one note. So I'd buy a note for 40,000, sell a partial on it, basically sell out of that, take that same 40, buy and sell, and buy and sell, and buy and sell. I made 2 times quite often, but 3 was tough.
Yeah,
that's great. But I had to do to cover my nut on that. I had to do 10-year partials for the most part. So it's not going to be probably another 2 or 3 years before I start to see any of that income reverting back to me on those partials that I sold. Well, if you look at it on a yield basis, it's a great yield. I don't have anything in it, but I kind of don't have any income for a while.
Well, that's the chance you take, right? And depending on where you're at in your life cycle, that may be a good decision for you, or you may need to accelerate that and get the money sooner, or you can wait 20 or 25 years, just depending on how old you are and where you're at and what you need to do. So I guess, Richard, what we're trying to get to the point on this is that if you're getting into this business and you have a large amount of disposable income, we're talking several $100,000 to in the millions, then getting into it full time right away is not as big of a challenge as it is if you really don't have the capital or the resources for it, because the challenges of flipping a loan, or what we call brokering a loan, like you mentioned before, the margins are a little bit thinner than they used to be. So it's harder to sustain a velocity model. You have to do a lot of those transactions to really make a good living, as opposed to, 8 years ago when you could do that and you didn't have to flip that many loans and you can make a really good living because the margins were much greater, much sweeter. So getting into this business, if you have money, that's a great way to be active quickly. But if you don't, it probably is best for you to, keep your part-time or full-time job and then kind of doing this on the side to build towards it. Because I agree with what you said, Richard. It does take away more time that you have outside of like your W-2 job. But if you're able to do this work part-time, you can make some good money. You just don't get a lot of return on your time because you have to work a little bit harder, on a part-time basis with this lifestyle.
Right. And so I think something else we wanted to talk about a little bit today was maybe land contracts and the use of land contracts. Did you want to bring that up or not?
Since you brought it up, I guess we have to.
I guess we have to. Okay.
Land contracts. We, in our fund, I think we may have one land contract. I think everything else is pretty much a note deed of trust or note and mortgage, depending on what state it's in. In my personal portfolio, I only have a handful of land contracts left. I've either converted them to note and mortgages, or I have just sold them off because people had needed good cash flowing assets and they just happened to be land contracts. I continue to get notices from the counties, even though I have sold those assets months or years ago, because the counties are so slow to update information, and you can have the new buyer call into the county and kind of update the records of where to send the statements to. But at the end of the day, if you can avoid doing a contract for deed or land contract, it's going to be a lot better for everybody involved if you don't do that. There are certain instances where you would want to do a contract for deed / land contract, and that would be more or less when you're wrapping a mortgage, meaning Richard has a mortgage on this investment property and he wants to resell that property on a land contract. So the Richard would stay on the deed and then he wouldn't trigger a due on sale clause, those would be appropriate reasons why you would want to do a land contract. But outside of that, I know you're on the same side of the story as me, and I'll let you chime in, but I'm definitely not choosing to do a land contract.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people out there would say, "Gee, I don't see any reason to change from one," but I've run across two reasons lately. Um, to to get out of them. One is that I'm getting, as you said, constant notices from the county and things like that about, hey, you've got a trailer parked in your front yard. I'm in California, and that front yard happens to be in Ohio. So,
Right.
minor things like that. That's more of a nuisance, but it comes down to title. I just lost a sale on one property. My borrower said, "Hey, look, I'd like to sell," and we got to the title company, and the title company said, "I'm not touching this. We're not going to do this at all. We really don't consider this to be a clean deal. It's a cloud on title. So basically, go out and convert it to a note and mortgage before we even look at it." And if you are on any sort of time constraint to sell, that's just something you don't want to deal with. How much does it cost, and how long does it taking you to convert most of those that you have, Justin?
I mean, it depends on the state that you're in, but I'd say anywhere from probably $600 to $1,600.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I mean, I've got I don't know how many land contracts. I've got more than I should, but I'm going to go about converting all of those, I think. Just because I don't want to run into any more problems
Yeah.
like this.
And I know that sounds like a lot of money, but in all actuality, this is a conversation that we would have with the borrower, and we would lay out all the pluses for them, right? Like,
Right.
look, your situation now, you are not on the deed. Are you aware of that? And maybe like, no, I'm not. Well, if you want to be on the deed, this is a way to get you on the deed. We can insure the title right now to make sure that it's clean of any, encumbrances. And then we can also get a policy that guarantees that the lien is there and that your lien is valid and active. And it gives you more protection and it gives us more protection. And so when you go and sell the property, you're not going to have these title companies that are going to push back and say, wait a minute, this is a foreign object to us. We don't understand it. So we're just not going to move forward with it. So oftentimes I've gotten the borrowers to come forward and actually help pay for some of the costs as well. I'll pay for like the title policy because that's a general thing a seller would do for a buyer. But everything else, is something they would pay for. Recording the deed, the split the cost of generating the note and mortgage. So yeah, that's kind of my answer to your question on the cost and stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, that's what I came from the school of no, it doesn't make any difference, and I've slowly come around to saying, yes, it does. So we just bring that up to listeners to
It does when you have many of them.
yeah.
If you just have one or two, if the opportunity presents itself, of course, go ahead and change it and convert it. It's when you have many of these, like Richard and I do, it becomes a real nuisance.
Right.
Getting all the notices and everything, because at first when you get a notice from a county, you're thinking, oh God, what happened? What do I owe on this one? You think of it like a bill that you're getting that you're just not happy about. And it turns out it's usually just some sort of notice that says, hey, the taxes are due and this is what the assessment is on it. Or sometimes it is a bad thing where it's, hey, there's a camper in the yard that's not supposed to be there, and we're going to charge you $350 to you, and you're the deeded owner.
Right.
Good luck trying to explain to the county that it's a land contract and you don't really own it, but you do.
Yeah. So one property I had in Missouri, the owner triggered. Actually, here's what happened. The county got wind of the land contract, and they said that he was a tenant living in the property. And I said, no, he's not a tenant. He's the owner. I said, no. As far as we're concerned, he's a tenant. Well, as soon as he was a tenant, that triggered the landlord lease laws
Yep.
there, and they had to do a property inspection. Well, they had to do a property inspection, and guess what? They found $4,000 or $5,000 worth of items that need to be taken care of in the house to make it fit for what they considered to be occupancy by a tenant. None of them, they were just fine things. They were small things, but they were gotchas. So all of a sudden he's saddled with $5,000 or $6,000. And just, you can imagine the amount of time that I had to spend on that and going back and forth and explaining it and blah, 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 blah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's endless. A lot of fun.
Endless. Yeah. So
yeah.
Do a mortgage, do a deed of trust, whatever.
It's simple. It doesn't cost anything different.
Yeah. Yeah.
You get no advantages. Anybody listening to this or watching this, you get no advantages having a contract for land contract. You can't tell me that you can evict them if they don't make their first payment. It doesn't work like you think. A lot of judges do not like land contracts, and so they will make you foreclose on them as if it was a note and mortgage anyways.
Yeah, even though your paperwork says otherwise, you still, in a lot of cases, have to handle it as if it were a note and mortgage.
Yeah. That's all the time we got for today. Thanks, Richard, for joining us again. This is episode number 19, season 5 of the Be the Bank podcast. You can check out.
Have we run out of time again?
We've run out of time.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no more fun, man.
Oh,
check out our YouTube channel, American Note Buyers YouTube channel. You can check out the video feed in our monthly broadcast that we do live, which by the time this airs, we would already have it. So I guess you'll miss it, but you can watch the replay if you go to our YouTube channel. How about that? We have a cool case study with Mr. Drew Shepard. He's one of our learning mentees here and in his apprenticeship. And so he's got a cool little case study, and I think you guys will enjoy it. So watch the replay of that if you didn't get a chance to watch it live. Until then, I'm Justin Bogard. This is Richard Thornton, and we will see you guys next time.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Be the Bank. We hope you learned something from today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us. Plus, check out our channel on YouTube and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Be the Bank and on Instagram at Be the Bank Podcast. Be the Bank is sponsored by American Note Buyers. Thanks again for listening.